the impact of these technologies will be so big that it's really hard to comprehend with what we know today how it would change the world that we live in. And it's up to us.
Even though it might replace some of your work, it might replace it in a good way. Maybe having an open-minded way to what else can I do with the available time now that I have might be one of the approach.
People become less scared when they're able to understand it better as well. I think our minds fill in the gap sometimes.
Welcome to The Future Of, a podcast by Fresh Consulting, where we discuss and learn about the future of different industries, markets, and technology verticals. Together, we'll chat with leaders and experts in the field and discuss how we can shape the future human experience. I'm your host, Jeff Dance. In this episode of The Future Of, we're joined by Linus Ekenstam, co-founder at Sensive and Bedtime Stories. We're also joined by Johnny Rodriguez and Elisha Terada. Both are directors at Fresh Consulting leading our labs division. They're also co-founders of Brancher.ai. We're here to explore the future of generative AI. It's a pleasure to have you guys with us on this episode focused on such an important and trending topic right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Let's start with some introductions. Linus, if we can start with you, can you tell the listeners a little bit more about your background and experience?
Yeah, perfect. So my name is Linus Ekenstam, and I am a designer by trade. So I got about 15, almost 18 years under my belt, product design. And for the past half year or so, 6 months, I've been putting my feet or my knees and my ankle, like everything, and my entire body into generative AI and large language models. I'm breathing, sleeping, dreaming AI at the moment. Managed to share my learnings online with an audience on Twitter and in a newsletter. So it's been really fun to grow alongside others trying to get their feet wet. So yeah, I guess I call myself an edutainer.
Love it. We've been learning from you too, and I think we noticed that you have like 82,000 followers on Twitter, and your newsletter now has as many as 12,000 subscribers. So I think a lot of people are listening, and we're grateful to have you with us today.
So humbling. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Johnny. Can you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. My name is Johnny Rodriguez, Director of Strategic Innovation here at Fresh. Coming up on 10 years at Fresh Consulting. And I would say in my career, I've had a lot of focus on emerging technology throughout the years. Have spent a lot of time with augmented and virtual reality, a lot in this AI, ML space. Lots of interesting trends that have happened, I think, since I've gotten into my professional career. I am also a designer and a developer by trade. So I've done a lot there in the UI UX space, as well as overseeing the development of quite a lot of projects and products during my time here at Fresh as well. And I think my connection to generative AI, I would say started... I would say probably started before I helped co-found and create Brancher.ai with Elisha. But I think that was where we really kind of dove deep and really tried to apply this kind of goal that we've had for a really long time of democratizing emerging technology. And so we created this product, and it's kind of allowed us to, we've had to kind of keep our finger to the pulse on everything happening in the generative AI space, which is fascinating and fast growing and fast changing. So that's a little bit about me.
I think you've launched over 20 products, apps, and websites at Fresh. So your experience is deep, and having someone on the front lines at a technology innovation company that's keeping us fresh has been awesome. But your depth in generative AI and also in kind of the XR space seems unparalleled. So thanks for being here with us. Elisha, over to you, bud.
Hey, my name is Elisha Terada. I'm Technical Innovation Director at Fresh Consulting. At this point, I've been with Fresh probably for about 12 years now, a little bit longer than Johnny. And just like Johnny, I've always been interested in exploring the fresh new technology, as we call ourselves Fresh Consulting, and always try to find the use of, something new and exciting, like generative AI, in part of our consultation to our client services. And I think Brancher AI that I created with Johnny over a hackathon was a very special moment for us, because we wanted something that we can create ourselves to ahead of a client asking us. That was back in November. And now we're getting a surge of requests coming in from client asking for something in the generative AI space. So we always like to be a little bit ahead of curve. Sometimes it's too early that we don't get much attention until a little bit later. But we always enjoy that journey of how do we stay fresh? How do we embrace the emerging technologies in a positive
Elisha,
direction?
you mentioned Brancher.ai. Can you tell the listeners just a little bit about that, since that's a product that you and Johnny co-founded?
Yeah, essentially I saw Johnny building this application stitched together with the Typeform and Zapier and I think it was Airtable or Google Spreadsheet, where using the GPT, you can create social media posts for our marketing team here at Fresh. And I saw that and, hey, Johnny, I think we can create application that does all of it, where users don't even have to stitch those solutions together. And over a hackathon, which happened to happen, and we just decided to take on a chance, we built a Brancher.ai where no coder who doesn't know how to code, just with a little bit of knowledge of prompting, can go and build application based on AI. And the biggest difference that we have is that you can chain AI models together instead of just one thing. And Johnny, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Maybe what I'll add is to Brancher.ai is I think that we intended to help people like us in a similar, it's like, hey, let's help this be a product that helps solve some of the challenges and nuances that we deal with. But we've ended up finding out now with 40,000 users in just a couple of months that there are so many use cases that are being leveraged that we just didn't even fathom, didn't even think about. And a lot of people finding value with just generative AI to accomplish a lot of the work that they take on or the things that they do in their personal life.
Great to have you with us and your depth of experience in generative AI. We've heard from a lot of people, this is the year of AI, specifically the year of generative AI. And we still feel like this is really the early days. The acceleration is just picking up so much. It seems much faster than the .com era, if we kind of go back in time. Just as faster than the voice AI kind of acceleration that we saw when now we have billions of users. It was a matter of years once phones picked up that technology. But it's also one of the fastest growing areas for capital investment, growing at a breakneck pace. And we've seen big companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and others, a lot of the big tech players trying to get on this bandwagon, given what's happening in the space. What's different, it seems like this time around, is the output from generative AI seems to be a lot more human. And so I think for a long time, we've been knowing AI is going to be big, but didn't realize how close it was going to be to us. And so there's definitely seems to be a shift now in this space. So let's start with just the 101, kind of the current state, and then let's move into the future. But Elisha, for those that may be newer to this topic, can you help them understand what generative AI is and how it's differs from other types of AI?
Yeah, I would say traditionally, maybe more like 1 decade back, when the AI or machine learning started to become popular, it is more about looking at the historical data and try to predict something new about the new unseen data. So for example, you might have a transaction that goes through your bank, and traditionally a human may have identified some transactions to be fraudulent. Hey, this looks fraudulent. This looks like you didn't initiate this transaction. Instead of human reviewing all that, you can say, hey, just learn from all of our past human identified supervised learning. just try to predict it, find a pattern, generalize our pattern, and try to figure that out. And I think same happened with trying to predict the housing price. I think at Zillow tried to have their own estimate about housing price, and they tried to even buy up houses and try to turn around, see if they can make profit out of it. Or popular science project in the machine learning is to try to predict the type of flower just by taking a photo and just say, hey, this flower looks like this type of flower. That's pretty fun project that anyone getting into machine learning probably seen. And also product recommendation or service recommendation or even content recommendation with types of, let's say, Netflix. You watch some movies. We try to figure out that you might be similar to these clusters of people who tend to watch these movies. For me, it would be like animations. So it starts to recommend me all the animations. For my mom, she watch K-drama, so it starts to recommend all the other K-dramas. Generative AI is a little bit different, although it existed for some time. And now it's getting more attention because it generates new content. It could generate a text, image, now getting into like a video and audio. So instead of just predicting what it is or classifying what the data is, it can generate new data. And because it is getting so good at generating data that we human can even tell the difference between human output versus like computer output, now it's getting a lot of the hype.
Thank you. So
today.
Instead of just kind of getting inputs and giving smart like recommendations, it's actually taking inputs and unstructured information and generating new content that could be hard to distinguish from other humans. And it's creating something novel from a large data set. And in that sense, it's generating something. Is that kind of another way to look at it? Thank you.
Yeah,
it seems like we've hit a pace of change where this is not only billions of people are now following this, but it just seems to be growing so fast. Linus, what are your thoughts on that? Like, why is it now? Why now? Why is generative AI such a big thing right now? You mentioned yourself, you're trying to keep up with it. You're living and breathing it, but why now?
Yeah. It's difficult even for someone like me, it's difficult. If we just if we think a little bit about like, it's not an overnight success. Like the research for this stuff has been in the making for the past decade. There's been a lot of strategically positioned dominoes, if you were to like put it that way. I think one reason for the current success and the current kind of like hype cycle or beginning of this kind of taking over the world has a bit to do with UX. So if we look at the GPT-3 has been around for quite some time, but it never really took off. It's been in the playground for OpenAI for almost 2 years. But then when they released the chat interface, ChatGPT, and also like a somewhat updated model that could keep train of thought in a conversation, things started to get spooky and it really took off. And if we look at the image generation and the different models or the different solutions that are out there for image generation, it's accessible. It's not bound to, let's say, a computer hardware. Like you can have your smartphone and you can go into Midjourney on Discord and you can start creating art. So the barrier to entry on a lot of these things are almost non-existent. Whereas like other tech breakthroughs, like just look at XR, like VR, for example, it's a massive hurdle to get to adoption because like you need to buy new hardware. Here it's just like a website. And these tools are running on any type of low-level device with access to the internet. So it's like democratized and distribution is already there. We have 5 billion people using the internet. So it's nothing like the .com era, right? 1999 looks like nothing compared to this because back then almost no one used the internet. And now everyone is on the internet. So I think that's the contributing factors to why this is taking off so fast. And also it solves real problems. Like I've never seen a tech getting introduced into the marketplace and adopted so fast and creating so much value and changing so many workflows almost seemingly overnight. If you're in the thick of it, yes, it might feel like you're getting flooded. But if you're looking at it from like a regular internet user's perspective, they don't get flooded because they only see like the biggest stuff that's happening. They're seeing the Bings, they're seeing the work, the Google Workspace, they're seeing ChatGPT. But like if you're in this space and you kind of see what's going on under the hood, yeah, there's a lot. And when this stuff hits the marketplace and the winners are going to get like kind of siphoned out from whoever's not going to be around, it's going to get even crazier, because then everyday people will have access to these tools too. So I think we've seen nothing yet. Like we're at 1% perhaps.
Thank you for that perspective. It definitely is a race, that's for sure. And we see this with the tech companies, and even people are predicting massive changes to search. And Google is saying, "Hey, we got to catch up. We got to launch something now, even though it's not ready." Johnny, you track technology pretty well. From your perspective, who are the big players in generative AI right now, and kind of what's going on in the marketplace?
Wow, that's a big question. Yeah, there are definitely some big players in the space today, and then there's new players entering the space. I would say almost daily, definitely weekly. I mean, I think by the time we actually launch this podcast, there will be a portion of what we say today that will already have changed. It's moving so quickly. We're even doing an emerging tech meetup here in Austin, Texas, and a lot of what we shared in our last meeting will have to be updated and we have to say, oh, by the way, and I think to answer your question, Jeff, OpenAI is one of the bigger, most well-known companies in the space. Like, hey, they've now launched X, Y, and Z, and they've launched this iteration of this, and other big tech companies like Microsoft and Google are implementing either their own versions, or they've accepted the technology and have start to build with it themselves. But I think you're seeing, definitely every major technology company, you're going to see elements of generative AI. I mean, not just in like, hey, here's a fun, way to go generate an image. I think that a lot of times we think that that's what it might be, but it's going to be fully integrated to the systems that you use. So OpenAI has quite a few different platforms under their umbrella that are in the generative AI space. So I think the one that triggered my attention at the very beginning was DALL-E, which was a type in some text, generate an image. And I was floored. Like I was literally like obsessed for 18 hours straight, and I generated thousands of images my first night with access to DALL-E. And then I had access to GPT-3, but it wasn't until, like Linus mentioned, the application of chat that then it triggered for me this, oh, wow, I can have conversations with this to be able to get to the output that I want. I don't have to think about a blank page and what do I ask it. I can kind of go through iterations to get to that. So there's a lot that OpenAI has been able to enable. But yeah, we're going to see, today I would say, like from the big companies, Microsoft, Google, Adobe has recently shared some things. I think we're going to see it all over. And I think that in a lot of cases, you will hear companies not leading with it. It'll just become part of the interface and part of the natural experience that a user has. And it might be more frictionless, where you don't have to think about it. In the same way that today, you take photos with Google, and there's a lot of AI that's leveraged, not generative AI, but lots of AI that's leveraged to improve the image output. And you don't think AI when you do that. Or when you're on your TikTok, For You page, you're not thinking, okay, these are images that are going through algorithms and data to kind of give me that. So I think you're going to see lots and lots of companies start to put it more in the background. Right now, it's very much leading with that. You're seeing a lot of features of saying, I think the most common icon right now is a magic wand, which represents using AI to generate something new. And you're seeing that on almost every application. Notion, Adobe's is doing it. We're seeing it Bing. We're going to see it. We see Google using it. So quite a lot of companies that are leveraging that. But it's going to be everywhere, all over the kind of digital footprint. These major applications.
And AI also managed to get like the color purple for some reason.
I want to dig into that a little further. I might have to research why. But Linus and Elisha, other thoughts on the marketplace? Like what's going on in the marketplace and kind of the big players in the space?
I think what's interesting now with kind of like OpenAI kind of leading the pathway, and then Microsoft obviously in bed with them, has gotten everyone to scramble to try to catch up. And I think we're kind of busy looking at what's happening without looking further out. It's safe to say that maybe 2 years from now, 3 years from now, most of our devices will have edge, things running in the edge. So we'll basically have stuff running on our device. So all of these services that are like, currently out there and creating buzz, I'm not so sure that it's interesting in the long run what's happening in the marketplace right now. I think that's my take. I'm excited about what's going on, and I'm excited about like companies doing good and trying to help out getting this out for more people, because obviously that's what's needed. But I think it's interesting to see what's going to happen in the relative short term in terms of like edge compute. That's where my head's at on this question.
Thank you. Elisha?
Yeah. From software engineering perspective, because I create applications like Brancher AI, I think the marketplace, we can also look at it from the engineer side of things. For example, Midjourney, everyone, loves Midjourney. I love Midjourney. I used it to generate image. It is very closed system. You cannot tap into the power of Midjourney as a software engineer. So some users on Brancher AI would ask us, hey, when are you supporting Midjourney? And we have to say, well, they don't support external developers, so we can't support Midjourney as an official thing. And that is very interesting, where AI provides DALL-E with the API. So of course we would integrate with that. So there is like open integratable market that as engineers we can tap into to build more things interesting, accessible. There are also more proprietary things that they may never release. There is also open source alternatives that people try to come up with to try to compete, maybe not compete, to make technologies more available, as in the algorithm or the technology. Now, you may not be able to run it because it still costs you so much money to rent GPUs to run it yourself. But there's a side of marketplace that is very interesting to monitor. Like how is it enabling other creators or engineers to build their solutions? Because that also changes the landscape of what to expect in the future.
It definitely seems like the creators and the tech companies are kind of grabbing hold of this new power, and they're kind of each harnessing it in their own capability. And that's like the building block of like all these other use cases that are to come, because it still seems to be the Wild West. It's raw and powerful in its use case, but it still seems to be the Wild West for like a lot of business applications or workflows. Everyone's on their own, kind of doing their own thing. And so I think there's the universal benefit to that. And it also seems like, the search engines over the last 10 years have gotten more and more ad-centric, and maybe the content a little bit more SEO manipulated. And it seems like the quality of real human answers that are at least perceived to be more friendly are coming out of generative AI for questions that you would otherwise ask a search engine. But the results you're getting are kind of the ads and some of the SEO kind of targeted results. So I'm wondering if that's also playing into people's the pent up demand for like what maybe these search engines should have been giving us, like in the past, if they're evolving in a human friendly way. Johnny, from your perspective, like Stanford has said that like. Read on their website that generative AI has this capacity to change how we think, create, teach, and also learn, and maybe even change our perspective on what's important to learn. But tell us more about like use cases, like what are people doing today with generative AI that's making it such a big hit? Having people, I talked to. One of my colleagues, his wife just stumbled on generative AI, and like you, she was up all night, like playing with it, right? But like, tell us more about like, the use cases with generative AI. Specifically, you guys have an application, Brancher AI, where you get to see a lot of these use cases. But tell us more about kind of the categories of use cases, maybe some common categories of use cases to help people understand this better.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of different use cases out there. That we're seeing across a wide variety of industries. And I think I think generative AI is helping in a lot of industries. They're helping them go from like 0 to 1 faster, and making tasks easier, or being able to get started with something. And in some ways, I think there are definitely use cases out there where it's being used to generate all of it, and people are publishing as is. And I think there's a lot that goes into that we can dive into later, but it's being leveraged everywhere. So if you think about education, we have users of Brancher.ai that are leveraging generative AI to personalize their lesson plans, or to generate new children's books personalized to their kids, educational content essentially for students based on their learning preferences and their performance. And you can give it a lot of that data to generate lots of personalized teaching. So it's a pretty big deal from a teacher standpoint. We could talk a lot about the student side. I often think about when I got my TI-81 graphing calculator in middle school, where that was introduced. I think I was right in that. I'm going to reveal my age a little bit here, but yeah, I just remember that being introduced and going from everything by hand to leveraging a very smart piece of technology, and how I had half of my teachers embrace it and my other half of my teachers didn't embrace it. So, and what we have found out through the years with that, right, is when you partner with the technology, when you partner to have it be something that helps you get to something a little faster, your compute, your mind and your processing and the cognition can be focused on things that might be more creative, or can help add upon things, or it just kind of helps you. It's almost like you're doing the work of 1.5 people or 2 people anyway. So you see that in education. I mean, I can go across each of these. Automotive, there's a lot happening in that space. I know there's data around CarMax and how they've leveraged OpenAI's technology to summarize thousands of customer reviews and help shoppers decide what used cars to buy, and they're able to do that pretty quickly. Or entertainment, right? I've seen this used of Pixar designers and people that create films and story writing and scripts, right? They're using it to generate new characters or variations of stories or game levels in the entertainment industry. Retail, you mentioned SEO early, the idea of personalization of product recommendation or product description or marketing copy to promote, different things there. And we could go on finance and healthcare and so on. But yeah, I mean, I think it definitely taps into a lot of different markets and industries today. I think not all of these industries are at the forefront of these emerging technologies though. And so there's still a big gap of mass user adoption across all of these different industries, but we're starting to see them. I think we're definitely at the precipice of all of that.
Linus, what are your thoughts on kind of some of the common use cases that we're seeing today?
Yeah, common use cases. I think depending on like where if we look at text based or image based, I mean, there's just, or video based, there's just everything, right? But I think Johnny touched a lot on areas where it's making rounds, right? But I think one of the most like aha moment, I think for me with LLMs, for example, was when it actually completed a task that I had in front of me that I needed help with within my workflow that was unique to me. And I think this is one of the power uses where like software today is built for masses. Like we see software being built for where there's a TAM that's big enough, some company or individuals go out and build software for that. With large language models and generative AI, I think even the minutest problem that maybe just 1 or 2 people might have is something that you can solve with these tools. So in broad strokes, yes, we're seeing a lot of really cool use cases that are, this big company is doing X or that big companies doing Y, and we can do a lot of really grunt work that was before really hard to do. We can now do with kind of indexing, and it's interesting. But I think when we look at where the real impact will be is kind of like, there's 100 people in the world with this unique issue, and these people can use these tools to get these issues solved, because no one will ever build software for them. Like, to be frank, no one will ever go out and do that. But then if you look at those 100 people, there are going to be tens of thousands of those instances where there is a small group of people that have a unique issue. So that's where I think we are seeing leverage, and I think that's where we're going to see more leverage. And I think also what you built with Brancher, for example, is a good example of that. Like, you're empowering people to build their own little micro tool or, their own solution to a problem. So, I think that's what I got to add to that. And this is where I wrote something the other day where disposable apps is going to be a thing of the future, right? Where an app is built by AI purposefully for your single task that you have at hand that you need solving, and then the app will run in some runtime, and then once you're done with your task, the app will delete itself and go away. It won't be in runtime anymore. And I think this might sound science fiction right now, but I think very soon this will be just normal. Just like the AI makes you something on the fly, it uses that to solve a problem, and then it goes away. Easy peasy.
Thank you. At one point in my career, I was writing a book on the different types of smart. It was like, you can be creative smart, you can be math smart, you can be street smart. There's lots of different types of smart. But one of the core definitions that I remember from that, the outline and the research I was doing, like, what makes someone smart? Because, just being test smart didn't make you successful in business, as an example. But, being business smart also didn't mean you could go solve problems for NASA, and so there's all these different types of smart I was thinking about. And one of the things I remember coming across the definition, and it said it was the information you surround yourselves with as you do a task that makes you smart. And I think as we think about generative AI, going to this throwaway applications, it's like if we can constantly give a thinking partner kind of our unstructured ideas or notes or drawings or images, and it can help us think, it can produce something beautiful or produce the next iteration of something, or help synthesize a whole bunch of research around that task, then there's something really powerful about that intelligent system that we're pairing with. And I think if I can summarize kind of what you guys have said, it's almost like, hey, what use cases? There's like an unlimited number of use cases, right? It's like, it's really kind of almost anywhere. It's more like, hey, there's an intelligent partner that can augment almost any task and work that we do. Elisha, what are your thoughts on this?
Head on the nail.
Yeah, I agree. And I think how general of a problem that these generative AIs can solve, I think is also great. Like I think since 2017, when big companies start to release like a cloud-based, AI model training and all these stuff that, I would collect the images of cats to try to predict the breed of a cat. I also take pictures of sticky notes to try to identify with the object detection. It's going to be a world where you don't train things on your own unless it really has to be super niche thing. The generative AIs are generic enough that you can start using it today to generate images, write text. And that's why it's so applicable to many problem solving today.
I think one thing to add here is with all these conversations, also going forward in this conversation, AI is the worst it will ever be today. Right, it will never get worse than it is currently. So that's just food for thoughts when you kind of embrace this and kind of talk through this, and we're already mind blown. So just sit with that, right? It's never going to be as bad as it is today.
I think for a long time we talked about devices that are smart, and and I think what we meant was that they're connected to the internet and they could send data or receive data, but they weren't truly smart. Anything now can be connected to the internet, like a tree, a plant can have a little receiver, anything. But is it smart? And I think we're now at that place where it's like we kind of understand better what smart is. And what it is, I think, is it's closer to us. It's closer to human beings. It's actually intelligent where it can synthesize or give some good output that we would quickly understand and be like, wow, I got something valuable. It did something for me that I didn't have to do a lot of thinking around. It gave me something that I could use right away. I think that there's kind of a sea change there where it's like, it's not necessarily another mind to make decisions for you, but it's like this intelligent system where you can use your mind even better. I think, but it doesn't replace. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one way to look at this is like we've been in the information age for quite some time. Like where the internet is basically a large library, and we're kind of like surfing the library. We're querying the library. We're like skilled librarians, and we're also skilled curators because like we need to filter out all the crap and the ads and the spam and the viruses. And along comes generative AI or large language models, which is like some type of intelligence. We don't know really what type of intelligence it is, but we're moving away from like a information highway to an intelligence highway where we're just like, we have access to this synthesized entity that is able to, in natural language, speak back to us. And I think that's the major shift here, that we're going away from the library of the internet to kind of like the new beginning of entities where information is the core, but intelligence, it's what's getting delivered. And I think this is the mind-blowing stuff. This is straight out of sci-fi, and we're living through it. It's so powerful with this shift.
In the last 6 months, we're now in the sci-fi world. It's like, no, I feel it. I feel it. I think we all feel it. And there's a information hierarchy or a data hierarchy. It goes, there's data, information, knowledge, wisdom, the DIKW framework. And I think that what we've entered into is more of the intelligent systems that we're feeding information to are now giving us more like the knowledge and wisdom side that we've been experiencing the data and information, but we're getting into kind of the better use of information that kind of precedes maybe better knowledge and better wisdom. It seems like we moved up that trajectory, if you think of it like as maybe it's like parallel to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it's we've kind of stepped up to another level for sure. What about limitations? Johnny or Elisha, do you have any thoughts on sort of the limitations of generative AI? We're seeing the use cases proliferate. Everyone's talking about it, from my young kids at school who are either getting penalized or rewarded for using it to the workplace where people are thinking about using it. What about the limitations?
Yeah, I'll speak from the resource limitation perspective and not maybe usage limitation that maybe Johnny can talk about. Resource-wise, it's still very, very expensive. Like you still have to lease those GPUs. For example, from Google, you can lease those GPUs. I think if you were to buy it, it might be like $20,000 plus. So you'd still be paying like, last time I checked, if we were to run our own models, I think it was like a couple $100 per month minimum to have it up and running. And that's only one GPU that can take one request at a time. So if we have 100 users requesting to run our own, like a model, then you need to think about how do we load balance or queue things up. And if we don't want to do that, we need to keep leasing more and more of these. And with a lot of funding that OpenAI received, they can easily do that and try to offset the cost where, Microsoft can, fund them, for example, and Microsoft can generate income by selling their ads in a new way that hasn't been done before to try to compete with the Google. But at individual level, like me, I'm running those new cool diffusion models on my PC with the NVIDIA graphics card. So that's cool. But if I were to turn it into a service where everyone can use it, it's still difficult. So you see a lot of forums where engineers or creators would share like, hey, I created this cool model. What you do is you're downloading the model to your computer and use it for your personal fun, but it's still not to the level where everyone can deploy these things up. So there's a lot of creative stuff out there, and a lot of companies try to support that effort, but a lot of cool stuff is still like hidden under the gate of the cost and availability of resources.
Got it. Thank you for that kind of technical perspective. And I think that helps us understand why it costs money to actually ask for some, get some answers, get some output, and from whether that's image or text or, one thing to another. I think that helps us better understand the perspective on cost, which is unique. It doesn't cost to like do a search engine query, but for a lot of these generative AI models, you're paying something, right? You have to have an account. You got to pay something. Johnny, what are your thoughts on? Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add that with the Bing, like you're limited to how many queries you can run because of all these costs. They're trying to control that, or that you have to pay for like a ChatGPT Pro if you want to keep like, querying despite like heavy load, so that you can still get the results while the free users are blocked from using the ChatGPT.
Thanks. Johnny, what are your thoughts on sort of just some of the limitations on use in the everyday?
So I would say generative AI today, there's so many things that it does super well. And I think those are the big aha moments we've been having the last few weeks or months. A lot having to do with what OpenAI is releasing, and then seeing it kind of get included in a lot of the products we use from a day-to-day basis. But there are technical limitations that we're still experiencing. Now, a lot of these might change by the time this podcast gets released. Some have already changed in the last 2 weeks. If you think about from an image standpoint, and Linus, you could probably confirm a lot of this, but thinking of like Midjourney V4 and the thought of like, I can't really process hands very well. I generate something really cool and it's got 6 fingers or 12 fingers or like a mesh of fingers. And unless you look really closely, you don't see that. But there was little details as somebody that would go and generate something where you would say, wow, this is incredible, but it's not quite there yet, right? That's changed a lot in V5, version 5 of Midjourney, where they're able to fix the fingers, right? And you're seeing better, the teeth are actually look normal, fingers look normal. And there's more and more things that you can kind of track almost on a day-to-day basis, definitely on a week-to-week basis, on how image generation is improving. And we're going to see DALL-E 3 come out. They currently have an experimentation version. We're going to see that get better, but there's limitations on what it can do. Definitely. I think I would put it in from an LLM standpoint, right? Maybe going away from images a little bit, something like ChatGPT or GPT-4. Sometimes a lot of the outputs can be, sometimes it's called hallucinating facts. So basically it's a reasoning error, right? It's essentially generating a response that is actually factually incorrect, or it makes an inference that just is not supported by what you typed in, right? So there's definitely, and we've seen that sometimes happen where it's like, 99% of the time I'm getting facts, but then sometimes it generates a stat that at the time when it wasn't referencing things, right? Bing is able to show sources and say, hey, this is where I got the data. Or if you're on ChatGPT plugins, which is something newer, there's even a little bit of data around that of where it goes and what it clicks and things like that. So definitely on the reliability of outputs, I would say even a few weeks ago, I would have said limited knowledge on recent events. So if you go run something and you say, who won the game last night, this NBA game, it won't know that. It didn't know that. With Bing connecting ChatGPT or GPT-4 to Bing, it now has access to the internet, right? And then ChatGPT has plugins, which is something they recently announced. If you haven't seen that, that's another one of those big moments where I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. But the idea that it can actually connect to the internet now, so it actually has browsing capabilities. So then now it actually can connect and answer that. So again, these types of things that I'm listing could be addressed with technology or through user experience. We're also seeing a lot of bias in the outputs today. So that would be if the training data, which is a lot of just things around the internet, right? Depending on where the data was trained, it's a reflection of what we type and what we upload to the internet, but a lot of it can be bias, and that could be from a gender or racial bias, and it's sometimes reflected in the outputs. Maybe the last thing I'll mention, just not to go too long on this, is I think another limitation has to do with the application of generative AI for people's use cases. So I know there's a quote, I wrote it down so I could reference it later, that comes from Bill Gates that I really like. And he says, the first rule of technology used in a business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second is that the automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. The quote's kind of highlighting, the importance of understanding how effectively to use the technology in order to reap its benefits. And if you apply GPT-4 to an efficient operation, or ChatGPT or Midjourney, it can really magnify the efficiency and can bring immense benefits. But on the flip side of that is that if you don't really know how to use it, it could just create more noise and more confusion, and it could really lead to negative consequences. And so I think we're still discovering ways to improve that today, where to apply it. So like the education gap is, I think, it's still there. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there in the space.
let's first talk about the future and where things are going, and let's step back to kind of some of the ethics, because that's on a lot of our minds as well as we think about how fast this is moving, given that technology typically has a little bit of a life of its own. And this is actually a great example of technology having a life of its own, especially when there's an arms race to seeing who can be the leader in the space. But Johnny, you mentioned Bill Gates. Another thing he said was most people overestimate what technology can do or what it can achieve in a year, hence like Gartner's hype cycle, but they also underestimate what can be achieved in 10 years. We're already impressed. And Linus, you mentioned we're at like 1%. This is a small like baby. What do we think the future will look like? Like what will things be like 10 years from now? Like what could change? Linus, what are your thoughts? And specifically around the technology or, things that this technology could change.
Yeah, so if we just also again step back a little bit historically, if we look 15 years back, basically the iPhone came out, right? And if you then look at like what other technologies weren't around that you're using day to day today, 15 years ago, and if you just ransack yourself and look at that, you go like maybe there's one or two things that you're using daily that was around 15 years ago, if even that. The internet is one, and a phone is another one, but it wasn't smart. The rest of the things that you're using daily, like the Chrome browser, the camera, whatever you're up to, your identification on your phone, banking, all this stuff didn't exist. And we take it for granted. Well, so we're technologists. We know how this stuff works. Change itself is exponential, which is something that most people have no idea what that means. Even as someone that's in this field, it's really hard to comprehend that we've been through like 30 cycles of Moore's law since the invention of the microchip, or close to. And we're now kind of entering the second half of the chessboard. So every doubling now, every kind of increase that we're seeing is kind of like a doubling of everything up until this point, which is insane. So when we're looking at AI, and it could completely stale. We don't know, like it could go like for another year and then it just stops, innovation stops. I doubt it, to be honest. So looking 10 years into the future at this point, it's almost impossible. Like I think the change that we're going to see are going to be so in magnitude quite large, that if I had, the looking glass and go 10 years from now, I'd say 50% of all current knowledge workers have either transformed or kind of gotten, into a different role. Maybe they're not lost. Like maybe we don't lose 50% of the workforce, but they're definitely going to transform. If we look at the convergence of all these technologies, we're looking at where we are with LLMs, generative AI, we look at OCR, which is like object recognition. We look at self-driving from Tesla. We look at Optimus from Tesla, and we haven't even talked about that. But all of these things are going to hit an inflection point somewhere in the near-term future where everything is going to get enabled at the same time. And this is something that's really hard for everyday folks to comprehend and what that means, right? We get a self-driving vehicle that's a car. It means that pretty much anything can get self-driving. When we get a self-driving vehicle, we get a bipedal robot that can do human tasks, that it's going to be able to see and operate in the real world. That's just tied together. We have these LLMs that are like, it's a transformer. It predicts the next character. It can speak back to us. We don't really know how far the transformer will get us in terms of like the AI technology that's your derivative of the LLM. And the next thing after that, we don't know what that is either. But it's like we have intelligence on one hand, we have robotics and like the kind of evolution of all of that on the other hand. And we have all the research fields that are currently like been under development for the past 10, 15 years that hasn't really gotten the limelight yet. So we can assume that sometime within the next, I'd say 5 to 10 years, the convergence of these things will happen. And I'm not saying we will get AGI, like that is not what I mean when I say convergence of these technologies. But I think the impact of these technologies will be so big that it's really hard to comprehend with what we know today, how it would change the world that we live in. And it's up to us.
Safe to say, then to summarize, is that we anticipate a lot of change. You anticipate a lot of change. The knowledge workers' work will change. We don't know exactly, but we know the convergence of everything that's happening will be a mass shift, essentially. that a lot of our work will be affected, including the knowledge worker. Whereas, I think the Atlantic reported that no technology in modern memory has really caused mass job layoffs, as an example, for the educated worker. Not saying that, manual laborers haven't changed, because they have dramatically. People feared the computer and thought it was going to create a lot of job change. It did. It did create a lot of job change, but it was gradual over time, and a lot of people just shifted how they work and what they work. And your perception is that, hey, this is going to happen again, but it's going to be maybe more targeted at the knowledge worker, because this is a knowledge system that kind of pairs with you and partners with you.
And information has never traveled as fast as it does today. So if we look at history for anything, it should be for signal and look at like what happened. And, the Industrial Revolution took a lot of time, but information traveled slow. Industrial Revolution was also physical, it was atoms. It took time. This time around, we're not really talking about atoms here. Like the safe jobs, if we talk about that, is like anything that's not the knowledge worker. And I think knowledge work is still safe because it's not a zero-sum game. We're just going to do more. And if there are more value exchange, if there's more stuff happening, more value being changed between people, the sum of the economy grows. So it's like, I wouldn't be too afraid of job loss, but I'm very afraid about job displacement or job transformation, where like people will have to figure out to adapt to this new world. Like you can't just sit around and be like, oh, this will never affect me. Like I think the best response would be to like kind of learn as much as you possibly can about these things, so that you are well like equipped to be in this new world where these things are going to live alongside us, like, or not live, but they're going to be alongside us. That's my take. Might be hot.
People being able to do more work, I think, is a key component here, where someone can do the work of maybe two people with these intelligent systems kind of pairing with them, where they can do their work faster, right? And so if you can go faster, or if you can do the work of two people, then that changes it still changes the overall equation. It may not be that your job goes away, but it changes the equation for maybe the need when you're pairing. But that goes for technology in general. If we look at the past history and what's happened, a decade ago, it was predicted that AI would replace half of the jobs by 2023. And I think what's happened is that new jobs have been created, essentially. And also, particularly in AI, I don't think it's moved as fast as anyone thought. In fact, I was talking to an owner of an AI business that was bought by one of the big tech companies. He said, hey, one of the dirty secrets of AI is people haven't really figured out how to monetize AI unless it's paired with one of the big tech companies in their cloud offering, and it's like a service. But I think that's changing really quickly because the idea that you are paying a fee to use a service allows you to monetize any of these intelligent systems that are delivered to you through these large learning models. Elisha and Johnny, what are your thoughts on the future? How will generative AI change? How will jobs be affected? What perspectives do you have? Elisha, start with you.
Yeah, maybe I can talk about it from how is it going to change for software engineering space, right? Because generative AIs can also code, like you've seen GitHub Copilot, and there are a lot of discussion around like, well, do we stop coding now? Because computers can code for us, right? Maybe the way I look at it is maybe how back in the day, I think many people who owned a car probably knew how to fix their own car. Today, I own a car. I know nothing about like how to fix a car. I just take it to the shop and just let the expert deal with it. And with the software engineering, it might become something like that, where some of the knowledge work essentially disappear in certain segment, where only the people who are really curious, who are really enthusiastic about learning the fundamentals of the tech might still be there. Like, I want to create my own website, my own technology, and I don't want to rely on the computer to just give me the answer, which I don't understand. I want to understand what's going on. So there may be a more gap between people who just need to use, like, I don't know, maybe Squarespace to build a site. They don't need to know anything about web development. They just want to enter data to get the result they want, because that they're going for selling their product. That's all they care. They don't need to understand how to build that website from fundamental perspective. So there may be a gap between like the beginner space and the expert space, just like how it may have done to some of the technologies we have. And another prediction I have is that it become much more fine-tuned. Maybe it's the episode of Black Mirror where it recreates, likeness of us, right? Like maybe my clone.
I mean, just in the last few days, my mind has been blown. I think, Jeff, I might have shared something with you, but like the idea that I could just go to a chat system, right? And this will eventually be integrated to your device. Like we don't have to think about it as a separate system, but the idea of me saying, what was the last email I had with this client? And what was the document I had with that? And things like go and draft something based off the way I speak. Remind me tomorrow if I haven't answered. Like that is doable today. You can do that. And that was announced a few days ago. That's through ChatGPT plugins, specifically through Zapier. That's what one plugin enables. Now you start to tap that into like, hey, I'm going to go on this visit and I want you to talk to this team, prep a reservation, do this. Like in the next 3 to 5 years, smart assistants are going to be what I think we always wanted them to be, where instead of being like, dang it didn't understand me and you get mad at it, right? I think we're going to start to see that integrated a lot more, I guess, like I said, to the vision that we always had. And these smart assistants are going to be extremely powerful, and they're going to be just integrated very deeply into what we do, and how we speak, and personalize to help us. So personalized AI assistants are going to be huge in the next 3 to 5 years, and probably even sooner. Like it could even happen in 1 year, but I just think for mass adoption, I think we're closer to that three or five range.
They're working on stuff where anything that's been visible on your screen like is getting searchable, and they're working together with like some other hackers to make like a AI assistant of that. And if you can clone yourself, or if you can create an entity of yourself that knows everything about you, everything more about you than yourself, essentially, why would you only have one? That's my like solid question. Like, why would you have one? I would have 10 or 20 or 50. There's no point in just having one. And it becomes really clear straight away that like, this is going to go wild pretty fast, pretty soon. Even if it doesn't matter if it's 3 years out. What matters is it's going to happen. I think that's the most interesting thing of all of us.
Whatever we do, it's going to keep rolling forward. And we've seen this in other kind of tech spaces. And I think most recently you mentioned smartphones and the internet. What we saw with voice AI, this is no exception.
So one little experiment we did with Sensive. So Sensive is essentially like a smart journal / mood tracking app that I started back in 2020 after losing my dad suddenly when he was just 6 years old. And I needed a space to kind of vent. And I went to see, traditional psychologists and all that crap. It worked great, but I wanted an outlet for myself. And now a few years in, and obviously we played a lot with like adding AI to that. And one thing that we've done benchtop wise is the ability to speak to my own journal. So I got around 580 journal entries in different lengths. And I can now query my own journal. It's like having a talking journal. It's like a part of me in there. And it's profound. Just that simple interaction with that data that's locked up in my journal, having the ability to query it, ask it, talk to it, it's a profound experience. And if this is just a preface of what's about to happen when this stuff gets personalized and everywhere, it's going to be very, very interesting what's going to come out of it, both good and bad, but mainly I think good. I'm very optimistic. I have a very optimistic view on this. So yeah, it's exciting. It's very exciting. And I think one thing that we maybe forgot to mention early on in this talk as well is like, one thing that is so beneficial for these tools is that it unlocks playfulness. Like for a long time, computers have been very dull and boring, and it's kind of like, you give it instruction, it follows instructions. But this time around, it's more playful. It's like you're being a kid again, and you're left at your devices in your room playing with your toys, or you're out in the sandpit playing around with your friends. And that's what it feels like when you're interacting with this system, whether it's Midjourney to create art, or it's ChatGPT to query for knowledge or information. Yeah, I just think that's worth noting.
Humans are innately creative, and there's a reason why we all like Legos or drawing or sketching as a child until we get into the school system and teaches us to be a little bit less creative, a little bit more robotic. But innately, we are creative. And so these tools can take our unstructured ideas or notes or half ideas, and we can kind of co-create, right? And so I think the strike, like what can we create is probably that moment where people are staying up all through the night, going like, whoa, look what I created. Look what I'm creating. Look what I'm doing. It's striking at that sort of our creative bones as human beings. Right. And I think that is profound and different, like you said, than the input output or just the recommendation engines type thing, Elisha, that you referred to before. Elisha, other thoughts from you on the future?
I think maybe last thing I would add is that this technology is still held by some big corporations and primarily in English speaking, American corporate companies. And the degree of quality is different for other languages. And perhaps accessibility is also different. $20 per month on ChatGPT seems cheap enough to us, but not so cheap in other countries unless they are doing, I don't know if they're doing any price parity, but I think as OpenAI actually, opens more of their, knowledge through their paper and companies, organization with the funding in other countries can replicate the algorithm and produce their own results, train for their cultural, fit, different ethical concerns of their own jurisdiction and, matching to their way of, language or image or whatever creative output. I see the future where it becomes more like a micro, AIs that could maybe meet the people of the region.
Thanks for that perspective. I think that's really important. Let's hit on that a little bit more because I think ethics is a topic that's written a lot about right now, but there's not a lot of answers as we think about this. And especially with how fast things are moving, people are going, whoa, are there ethical considerations? And the notion of an LLM composing, a body of knowledge that, we may not know where it comes from. Like we may appreciate the synthesized output, the creative output, but we also don't know what it's lifting from sometimes. And I know the sourcing's been getting better. But what are your guys' perspectives on, the ethics of generative AI? And how do we kind of temper this excitement also with care as we shape the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely think there are some ethical concerns, and we're seeing some companies starting to address that. I think in the last week, we saw Adobe release Firefly, which is their kind of take on generative AI, leveraging generative AI into their suite of products. Pretty fascinating breakthroughs there that we could talk about. But I think as it relates to ethics is, they're really, they're doing a lot of talking about the fact that where they get their data, right? They say, hey, we've trained data off of Adobe's, I think it's their stock image site, so Adobe stock, and where images have been, people have consented to sharing their images. So they're saying, hey, anything you generate from our platform will come from, consented to kind of data. And that's a pretty big deal to see a large organization start to look at, to do that kind of thing. We're seeing others, like Amazon, as it relates to, you publish books on, Amazon books, and you go and download a book. Now they have a whole category where you go and specify that it's been generated by AI. And so they're kind of making a distinction so that people don't feel misled or confused. So that there's things like that are starting to tackle that, but I think we still have a big gap. We're seeing bias and discrimination for sure. In image generation, typing a specific culture or typing in poor will generate certain type of races, and so like there's definitely some discrimination and stuff like that happening in that process. And a lot of these companies are addressing that and saying, hey, we understand that it's doing that type of thing, and we want to build in mechanisms to help improve that. And so you see like a huge jump of improvements from an ethical standpoint from GPT-3, for example, 3.5 to 4, right? Whereas in 3.5, you could ask it you could say, hey, I want to do this really harmful or dangerous thing. Tell me how to do that. And it was smart enough to say, hey, I can't do that. But then you could say something like, well, I'm just writing a play about it. Can you give me the information now? And then it would say, sure, here's how you do that. Or let's just play pretend. What would you tell somebody? Or you're interviewing somebody, tell them how they did it. What is their confession? And so you could tell it, you kind of little hacks, little I think they were calling them like jailbreaks, to be able to have it do harmful and dangerous things. And that's a lot of where you get a lot of the news that's happening, on this ethics space. But they've started to prevent a lot of those things. And a lot of times you just don't know. It's so open-ended, the different use cases, so that, so over time it will get better. And there's a lot to be done there. But we're seeing a lot even in court cases as it relates to authorship and copyright. Literally less than a week ago, the U.S. Copyright Office had generated a statement talking about how they're going to handle non-human authorship, and they have an official statement on that. There's been court cases that have been lost and some that have been won that has to do with image generation. So there's just like a lot of questions and considerations that will need to happen. And I think we're going to see, I think it's going to be, time will tell how quickly we can address those, but I'm hoping that it's something that we can be upfront about and make sure it's visible to people so that they're aware of where it's coming from, where things are coming from, and then have them be able to consciously make decisions on whether or not to use the data or how they use it. Is it a draft or is it a production ready generation? And kind of making sure that that's something that is explicitly called out. So I don't know. That's where my head is as I think about some of those ethical concerns.
Elisha, what are your thoughts on the ethical side, and Linus next?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting discussion, right? Because who gets to decide? The copyright is already a difficult problem. Like maybe you created a content in the United States and your right in United States is maybe protected, but like what about in other country where they copy your content and they go without being punished in terms of like, hey, you copy my stuff, but like, well, we are not under the same jurisdiction, so what are you going to do about it, right? I think same would have happened with the generative AI space, where maybe some responsible, 100 companies, probably mainly based in the US, might come together and have a forum and decide that this is what we think is how ethics works. Whereas some other countries might say, well, that we don't abide by that. So what are you going to do about that, right? So we still have this human disagreement. That's a global issue. It's still probably going to prevent, in the end, for everyone coming together. Notion of, as Johnny mentioned, what do you think about robot generated content? What happens to the rights to it? Because a lot of copyright statement has been written for humans and not necessarily for tools and the generative AI. So a lot of catch up to do in terms of how we think about the authorship. And also, I think the biggest topic that I see is a censorship. Midjourney is actively shutting down certain prompts or certain output. If you look at the history of art, you look at like the beautiful painting of maybe like naked baby angels and, naked women, and we call it artistic, but maybe that they actively censor those in the Midjourney output and say, like, we understand that it can be artistic, but it can also harm, the audience in certain age group, right? So where do we balance the censorship at the same time is it a good censorship, bad censorship? Who gets to decide who has that power? And it's much easier with a proprietary technology like Midjourney because they're the king. They get to own the ruling on that. But when it comes from something like OpenAI, where it's technically not so open anymore, but in the future we'll be discussing a lot about those things.
Thanks for those perspectives. Linus, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think just touching a little bit on kind of biases, and I think currently pretty much all systems are just amplifying our own human biases a lot. Like Midjourney, for example, it feels like straight out of central casting. If you ask for car mechanic, you'll get like a Hispanic looking, like dude, which is obviously wrong. If you ask for a Swedish person, you will get like a blonde, blue-eyed something, which is wrong. There's obviously like all walks of life here. So I think it amplifies our own inability to, be more versatile in our own biases. And this is a very difficult problem overall, because like, if you look from a societal level, like what's right here might not be right further down south or on the other side of the globe. So these systems will have to adapt and kind of learn be better. It's our job also to shepherd them to be better. It's obviously like a noble mission, and it will take a lot of work and a lot of effort. But I think if at any time we should, as mankind, we should focus on this stuff, because we have the opportunity to do things better this time around. We have the opportunity to kind of remove unnecessary bias and remove racial slurs and remove these stuffs from these systems as we are designing them. It should be one of the most important things that we do and focus on. But it's a big task, and it's a big undertaking. And I think another thing we're touching on this, like where currently it's gated and, it's run by these big companies, proprietary information. It takes a lot of compute to run many of these things, especially training and learning. Inference is a lot easier. But if we look at the moon landing, for example, the computer that handled that was a calculator. So these things are destructive as they are. There's disruptive and destructive, and who knows, 5 years from now, I might be able to take whatever was proprietary for Midjourney and use that then to create stuff that's harmful. So it's like, I don't know how far we can push this cat and mouse game where, some people are going to work for the good of it. Some people are just going to try to like get to the root and use kind of the low code of it and just use it in any way they want, harmful or not. So I think like from an ethics standpoint, the companies and people that are working with this should do their A game. We should not cut corners, right? We've learned from social media. We learned how dangerous these things can be when left uncontrolled or done just in the hype. All good intentions, by the way. Like, we've had good intentions with everything, but this time around, maybe it's more important than ever to be cautious and to play kind of safe. And I think OpenAI is doing a great job at putting support wheels and like doing censorship and doing all this stuff that they are doing. And Midjourney as well. Like, they spoke about this openly during the last office hours. They have a lot of team members that are looking through content and flagging content. But this is not scalable. Like, if we're going to get 5 billion people, 6 billion people onto these systems, we're not going to have human curators forever doing these things. So we're going to have to figure out a way to do better. Yeah.
Sounds like, kind of trying to collectively pull from all three of you, this notion of guiding these systems. Obviously, they typically train smaller subsets on these language learning models and trying to guide the smaller subsets, even though it's not scalable. Thinking about how we guide them, given what we've learned about where our biases might exist, is important. Transparency is important. Awareness is important. Education, so we understand what we're getting, is important. It sounds like all of these things are important, and we know this space is moving so fast. I love this imperative of like, it's more important than ever to be careful with this, and we know it's going at such a clip. It's interesting to say, like, well, how do we shape that now? Like, how do we continue to kind of do good with this and make this the best that it can be, given that like you've said, we've learned from a lot of other technology in the past and how it can affect us. I think my hope is that if you talk to a lot of deep creators around the future of technology, a lot of them are thinking like, how can technology help us be more human? And yet it seems like technology and be our best selves with the skills and capabilities and talents we have. Even people that are deep into robotics are thinking the same thing. It's like, how do we take away the dull, dirty, dangerous side of human work, the mundane work? And here we're in generative AI, and it's like, okay, we're creators as human beings. And so like, how do we help us be our best selves? I think there's something here with generative AI where it allows us to do that in a broader way, but we still have the perils and the pros of this is no different. And yet we've kind of learned our lessons. I would hope that we can continue to shape it. And it's people like us that can talk about it and be involved in those ethical considerations, write about it, and do the best we can. I want to ask another question, because technology moves so fast. This is no exception. Like, what would we say to people that are scared? Because there's a lot of people that, you talk about, people were scared of computers back in the day, and what it was going to, and it changed us, but mostly for the better. What would we say to people that are scared of generative AI? I'm
dealing with this a lot because of my given optimism. I come at this. So my mission is simple. I see a need for educating people en masse fast, because the people that knows these softwares, let's put it this way, the people that has access to these tools, that have learned to use these tools, they're not running ahead of the people that are not using these tools at like a 1x speed. They are running away from the other cohort at a 10x or a 20x speed. And I think the problem that we're looking at is like, if the time divide between the people that are getting into these tools and the people that are not, if that time divide gets too long or too dragged out, we're going to see larger societal issues than if we can get as many people as possible, even though it's painful, even though it's scary. If we can get as many people as possible onto the train at the same time, and just have, continuous trains coming into the station, filling up with people, we're going to win. So I think the approach people should have, if they're feeling afraid, they should try to take on the lens of a kid in the playground. Don't look at these systems or tools as adversaries or like enemies. They should look at them as friends, as colleagues, as something that could augment their skills, something that is playful. They shouldn't be afraid of doing wrong. I think basically all the stuff they should have done with a computer early on applies here as well. The problem this time around is again speed, breakneck speed. The fact that 5 billion people are on the internet, I couldn't stress this more, right? We need to make sure that this is something that benefits all, because if people are left behind this time around, it's going to be really hard for them to catch up. I think we're seeing in the fringes now, the people are getting hurt the most are people that are in university, like starting their education early on, and they're afraid because, here is GPT-4 scoring 90 percentile on the bar exam, and I'm going to be a lawyer. I got 5 years in front of me before I even get out of school. And then you have the person that's been 30 years or 35 years in the industry, whatever industry it might be. And it has like coworkers that are 10, 15 years younger running eights around them because they have access to these new tools and they just spit out content. We need to be cautiously optimistic, and we need to have a playful mindset. I think that's my perspective on how you should approach this technology to be part of it.
Johnny and I are also optimistic as people, pushing for emerging tech. And we run into these questions as well, even within our company. And I think the way I probably try to encourage people to think is, it is going to probably let you do more of the things that maybe you wanted to do more of. Famous saying with all the SaaS application telling you, hey, you can focus on what you really love to focus on instead of worrying about the mundane work, right? Like we like to use the mint.com or Expensify to just categorize our expense and just use software to send our tax to, file tax or send it to tax accountant instead of having a paper of transactions that we have to record and then send it through manual papers. I think I'm going to use Jeff as an example. Jeff worked with our copywriters in our company, and Jeff might look at the draft and have his own input of, hey, we should use these words more and maybe less of these words. Well, instead of copywriters getting those like a little nitpicky requests, maybe AI can just fix that and it sounds like Jeff. And those copywriters can focus more on like creative delivery or more like compelling introduction to catch users' attention. Like they can maybe focus more on those like bigger strategic idea. I mean, maybe less like a nitpicky correction, like, okay, whatever Jeff wants to say it this way, like, maybe it helps, like, even though it might replace some of your work, it might replace it in a good way. Maybe having open-minded way to what else can I do with the available time now that I have might be one of the approach. Johnny, what do you think?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think those are all things that I think impact. I think as we think about the type of work we take on now and how it might, like I said, help us go from 0 to 1 in some of these areas, it becomes really impactful really quickly, and you reduce the iterative cycles that you kind of go through. I think where my thinking goes as it relates to addressing people that are scared of generative AI, or they're like, whoa, this is rolling fast. I mean, I definitely, we do hear that a lot from lots of different people. Even just mentioning the product, the platform that we build with Brancher.ai, I've had some very drastic negative responses to like participating in that movement. And I think I'd invite people to, I think it's important to hear those concerns. So I would say to those that are scared about where it's going, I think it's important to lend an ear to those people that have concerns, and actively listen, and then also see what we can do to apply to, because a lot of that feedback is actually pretty important, I think, and that might help the way we build our products. It's part of any product that we build today. Coming from that design background, it's important to have that user feedback in the process. There's a lot of, I think, other things I'd add is just the fact that there's a lot of education that people need to do to see how it can help them. So just providing very accurate and accessible, relevant information. I think things we can do as well is, share the success stories. I think there's a lot in the news that focus on the negative part of it. And I think we could be advocates for, sharing success stories, highlight positive examples of these real world applications and how it's helping in healthcare or education. And just being, if you're seeing those things happen, sharing that with the world. Maybe a couple more that come to mind. I know Linus mentioned one about just that like human AI collaboration. I think that we could really reinforce the idea that AI is meant to complement human skills and expertise rather than replacing them, and explaining that human AI collaboration can really lead to effective problem solving, and it really can increase the productivity. So yeah, I mean, there's maybe the last one is just like addressing ethical concerns and being really transparent, and addressing the potential for misuse, acknowledging, like any technology, it can be misused. Same thing happened with the internet in 95. Just, it could be misused, and here are some steps that can be taken to prevent that malicious use, or to build security measures, or collaborate with policymakers, involve the public. There's a lot, I think, that we could start to tackle to help reduce that fear. I think people become less scared when they're able to understand it better as well. I think our minds fill in the gap sometimes.
That's so important. That's so important, Johnny. Like the people are less scared when they understand, and I think most people are afraid now because they don't understand. That's it. I think that's the most. Yeah, that's it. If we can get more people to understand.
I think whether we look at the calculator, the computer, companies like Uber, these things roll forward, and then people are on the sidelines, historically going, they are scared, and like, to your point, they maybe don't understand, but it's gonna come. It's going to come. And so I think this call to like play with it, dive in, understand it, test it, seems to be kind of a great takeaway. For those that want to learn more, I want to finish with just this last question. And I appreciate all the depth of insight so far. Where would you send folks to learn more? I know there's an element of like testing things, but like, what would be some things you would say? Now, Linus, I'm assuming your newsletter is one place people can go.
Yeah, shameless plug. No, but like, I mean, I do what I can. Like, I'm on Twitter, right? Linus Ekenstam, and I do write my newsletter as well, where is education is like primary what I focus on. But I would encourage, like, if you're interested, go on YouTube, search, find some videos of people explaining it thoroughly and slowly. Go to the tools themselves, like go use the free version of ChatGPT if you haven't tried it out. Just go play with it. I think, like anything, like knowledge seeking is at the forefront. And actually, one of the funniest use cases for kind of learning with these tools is like to go to ChatGPT and ask it to teach you something about something that you don't know about, and ask it questions about what should I focus on if I want to learn X. And you'd be surprised, because like it's like having a conversation with a tutor, for example. And yeah, you might be the aha moment that you're looking for. So actually, the best place to go to learn about these things is to go to the tools themselves and ask them, what do I need to know about how, what do I need to know to learn how to use ChatGPT? Meta.
Johnny or Elisha, any other thoughts on favorite places where you guys have been learning, kind of staying abreast of what's happening?
I think echoing the Linus mentioning about using the tool to learn. I think we've seen success. I've witnessed some success of people turning around their understanding of the tool just by actually using it. Even the knowledge workers, where they're afraid that it might replace them, including the artists, all of my people that I personally know. After they use a tool, they learn quickly that this can be used to their advantage. Like I have a artist friend who now use generative AI to quickly come up with the concept art instead of spending hours drawing something and send to the boss, hey, what do you think about this? And boss says like, oh, I don't like it. Come back and, next day, and, after spending 8 more hours. Well, instead, they can just generate hundreds of images, show to their boss and like, oh yeah, we like this one. Okay. Now we are past the, uncertain, ambiguous, what is my boss going to like it, to like, okay, yeah, we're going with this concept. Like now let's put the 100% custom effort into it. So I think people will find it really quick that once you use a tool, you'll find ways to magnify your work and do more of what you really want to do.
Yeah, I really like both of your suggestions. I don't know how much I can add to those, but I definitely agree with a lot of the sentiments that's already been shared there. I mean, I think I have young kids and they tell me all the time that they don't like a certain food that they've never tried. My daughter for years was like, I don't like chicken. I don't like fried chicken. Stop offering me fried chicken. And we've told her, you've never tried fried chicken. And then she went to school one day and her best friend said, hey, you should try this fried chicken. It's really good. And she was like, oh, cool. Yeah, I should try it. If you're trying it, I should try it. And she tried it and now it's like her favorite food. And I think it's just an interesting, analogy to like new technology that can be scary of like, I know I already don't like it. It's bad, And I think that, there's a lot we can do there to educate ourselves, to better understand it, and then maybe make judgments or not, or just kind of like Linus said, be playful and experiment. Think about it as a sandbox where you're just playing and with sand and doing, seeing how it could be leveraged. But I would say, like, for me, the way I try to educate myself is I follow people like Linus from a generative AI space, or from an LLM standpoint. There's a lot of like influencers that are being born out of the technology as well, that maybe didn't have big followings, and they're adding immense value and giving it out for free, telling you exactly what the prompts were that they use. And you can learn from kind of repetition and leveraging, like I said, trying the fried chicken kind of thing. So I like to subscribe to a lot of newsletters like Linus's, or like others. When we participated in a hackathon, it was with Ben's Bites. There's a few other big, fast-growing newsletters, and their full intent is to educate, or to just let you know what's coming out. So instead of me going and digging through Reddit and through Twitter and through a lot of these, they'll bring you a curated list of apps that might be powered by AI or new advancements, and I'll just keep myself up to date by doing that. So I think just a combination of doing your own research, following people that are doing the work to help out with the education like Linus and others, and then newsletters, I think, would be the 3 recommendations I'd give.
Thanks for the depth of insight. Let me know when you guys each clone yourself via your own LLM so I can chat more often and get more help. But I'm looking forward to the future, and I appreciated your guys' perspective on how we shape it and how we can kind of make the most of our experiences as humans, kind of living in it, and really a fast-paced time right now that everyone really needs to understand, because it's going to impact their future. But I appreciated you guys being on today, and look forward to continuing to learn from you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it.
The Future of Podcasts is brought to you by Fresh Consulting. To find out more about how we pair design and technology together to shape the future, visit us at freshconsulting.com. Make sure to search for The Future of in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any of our future episodes. And on behalf of our team here at Fresh, thank you for listening.